In this video, I'm going to be discussing the display property and how we can use that to display blocks next to one another horizontally. So as you can see, I've got a basic HTML page here with a div that is wrapping three other divs that have a class of box attached to them. Over on the right hand side, I've got my style.css. Up here we just have some basic browser resets, and then I've got my box class down here. I've established a height of 300 pixels and a width of 300 pixels and a background of light slate gray so that we can see them a little bit better, and a border of 1 pixel, and that's going to be solid and black. So let's take a look and see what we have here in the browser. And as you can see, I've got these blocks that are stacked on top of one another vertically. But that's not really what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to actually stack them horizontally. So if I inspect this element here, this top box, and let's go to computed to see some of the styling here. If I scroll down a little ways, we will eventually come to this property right here, display. You'll see that it has a value of block, and what a display block does is it makes that element occupy the entirety of its container. So if I hover over it here, you can see that it's actually occupying the entire width of this div that contains it. Same thing goes with the second one and the third one, although we can't really see it from here. So in order for me to get them to sit next to one another, I need to actually change that display property. And here's how we can do it. Inside my box class, I'm going to set the display to inline-block. And that should allow these divs to sit next to one another. So there we go. One thing you might notice though is that there's a little bit of sliver of space in between these, which is a little strange because as you can see in my browser resets, I've established a margin of 0 for everything. This is a little bit of a gotcha with inline-block, and as you can see in our HTML, even though you kind of expect these elements to be next to one another, there is some space in between them. In particular, I've got 4 spaces in between these elements. If I remove that space, then I should be able to get those elements right next to one another. So let's try that. Save that and take a peek. And as you can see, they're immediately next to one another, which is exactly what I wanted. There are other workarounds that you can use for this. You can establish some negative margin for elements, but I find that to be a little bit on the hacky side, but it's up to you. The easiest way is to generally just take that space out of the HTML. Okay. Another thing, maybe I decide I don't actually want those elements to be immediately next to one another. I do want a little bit of space between them. So I can establish some sort of a margin right. Let's say 25 pixels to space them out a little bit. And there we go. Space them out a little bit. Another scenario you may come across is where you want to space them out over a fixed number of pixels. So let's say that I wanted my boxes to be spaced out over a span of 1200 pixels. What we could do is we could change the width of our body to do that. So I'll come in here and I will target the body element and I'm going to give it an explicit width of 1200 pixels. Okay. Now that my body has a width of 1200 pixels, that means that this inner div right here on line 10 will also have a width of 1200 pixels because it has a display of block. Now with 3 of these boxes, I'm calculating that I've got, whoops, highlighted the wrong thing, I've got 900 pixels of width because again we've got 3 of them, which leaves me with 300 pixels left over. And if I look at the gutters here that are left, I know that I've got 2 of those gutters, which means that each one should be 150 pixels wide. So let's change our margin right to try to fill that space. So I'm going to change this to 150 pixels, and let's see what happens. Well, it looks like the third element here has spilled down into the next row because that's how inline-block behaves. Once we've run out of horizontal space, the element will be pushed to the next line down. So to see why that's the case, if I inspect this third element here, we'll see that the third element also has a margin right of 150. And that's what's causing it to take that extra space. So if I don't want it to take the extra space, I essentially need to remove that extra 150 pixels of margin on the third item. Here's how we can do it. So if I go to my CSS here and I specifically want to target the last element that has a box class, I can say .box and then last-child and specify a margin right of 0. And let's see if that does the trick. There we go. So we've spanned exactly 1200 pixels, and if I hover over this div here, we'll see that it is indeed 1200 pixels wide.